just a few minutes. We'll get into it. Well, maybe not a few minutes, a few seconds. I forget it. Let's just get started. So as you can see in the title, ladies and gentlemen, I had a thought. Doctor Strange and the Ghostbusters, they live in New York City. And they all deal with the paranormal. So, imagine if they somehow met. How could that go? Would it be an adversarial relationship? As in one that starts off like that? And what possible enemy could be strong enough to require the Ghostbusters' help? Because we both know that the magic that Doctor Strange possesses puts the proton packs to shame. But let's start with how they could potentially meet. My thinking is that there are a lot of, and I know this is a generic plot, but bear with me, skeptics in New York as to whether or not Doctor Strange can actually use real magic. Hello, Samuel VF1XJ. Hello, GNG NGH. Welcome to the stream. And okay, I'll call you Samuel. Apologies for that. I was getting a Dominic McGee. I have no idea what you're talking about. Sorry. Anyway, back on track. Maybe somebody calls the Ghostbusters and says, there's this guy called Doctor Strange who seemingly teamed up with the Avengers to beat this guy called Thanos. It's been said that he has magic. What do you think? You don't think Doctor Strange actually uses magic. What do you mean by that? If I might ask. I think I know where you might be going with that, but I'd love to hear what you mean, just in case I'm wrong. Also, thank you to those who have left likes, bringing the stream up to 3. The Ghostbusters haven't dealt with paranormal or supernatural in the form of a human who can use magic through an object, or through some other means. I see what you mean. Yeah. Well, he's so he's not a magical being. That's true. He's not a sorcerer or wizard in the same way that someone from Harry Potter would be, because they're born with that power, right? Like, that power emanates from themselves. He's just capable of connecting with the objects that have the magical power. Though that does make you wonder, if that's the case, why is it that the Ancient One was seemingly able to draw in energies from another realm without really seeming to need the help of objects? It was as if she had her own sort of power. So, is it possible that? And yes, I know I'm deviating. I'll get back on topic soon. Is it possible that over time, through um, using these artifacts, these objects of magic, that your body will get used to it and become somewhat magical itself? Could that be possible? Um, Maybe that's what that scene at the end of Multiverse of Madness was implying, because he gets what, a third eye. Um, but yeah, getting back on topic, I feel like the Ghostbusters would at least go to his I think it's his home. I keep forgetting the name of it. Is it the Santorum? The place where Strange and Wong uh, are located. Um, they go there to have a chat with him. I can't see any reason as to why Doctor Strange would treat them with hostility. If they're in the same universe, he obviously knows what they do. He probably admires them to some extent, because they fight the supernatural in a sense. Also, it's just that they mainly handle ghosts, but that also includes demons. Actually, it's mainly demons who, through their own power, shall we say, cause ghosts to bring about chaos. Um, no, I know I'm taking this way too seriously, because the Ghostbusters is obviously a franchise of comedic films. Though, if you were to look at the animated series Extreme Ghostbusters, it's a little more serious in tone, though it's quite comedic at the same time. Um, but I think it's still an interesting concept for a discussion. Um, so, would Doctor Strange try to demand that they give him access to their storage unit that contains all those ghosts? He obviously has no legal authority to do so, but maybe he could say, like, okay, since I was put in charge of this, I know he's not the Sorcerer Supreme, which is ridiculous, but that's another topic entirely. But he is still the Ancient One's successor, regardless of who is in the top position or not. Um, he's also clearly the stronger of the two when it comes to himself and Wong. I mean, in terms of just magical ability, he is quite literally the Sorcerer Supreme. He just doesn't have the title. Um, but anyway, yes, getting off topic. His title would not be taken seriously by any uh one with authority. The Ghostbusters might be a little bit different because they have been given permission by the New York City mayor in the past. So that could potentially come up where I could easily see Venkman shouting, "Oh yeah? Well, guess what? We're going to sue you, Mr. Wizard. Because first of all, I don't like your attitude, and second of all, how do we know you're not just some kind of a con artist?" That was a terrible Venkman impression. I do apologize. But I think it's very much in character for Venkman to say something, and then something absolutely outrageous and not to the point, right? Um, and that would probably lead to some kind of a court scene. I feel like Egon um, or Ray would be like, Venkman, you do realize we don't have the money to hire a lawyer. We can't even really afford to pay the bills. Now, that being said, Doctor Strange, hilariously enough, has even less money at his disposal than the Ghostbusters. So the Ghostbusters would have a much easier time getting a lawyer than Doctor Strange. Unless he was to call that girl that he was had once worked with that was a fellow surgeon and asked her for a loan. I don't recall if they're still on speaking terms or if there's any rules against that, but um, you know, it would just kind of be hilarious to see Doctor Strange maybe being like, you know what, I don't need a lawyer. I'm going to represent myself. I will just show the court that yes, I can do magic. But maybe that would be against the rules. Because wasn't there something about secrecy? The Ghostbusters, people would be a lot less skeptical of them because throughout their movies, there have been plenty of people in the city of New York that have seen them take on ghosts. Um, and the mayor has even seen them do that. So there's almost no question that they are legit and ghosts are real. With Doctor Strange, as far as they know, he's just a professional illusionist. Um, that's just better than the rest somehow. And maybe uses advanced technology to create, like constructs. Maybe he uses, like special effects that are higher quality somehow, right? Um, but I could definitely see Doctor Strange feeling like, okay, these guys may be scientists, but they're dealing with forces that they really can't understand as well as I can. And that is true. I mean, they've gone up against Gozer. They've gone up against I forget the name of the dude that was in the picture. The I think he was some kind of a warlock or something. And then if we use like the animated series, both of them as part of this discussion, they've gone up against so many like demons and evil gods and so on and so forth. Um, that um, wow, I just lost my train of thought. I apologize for that. Hold on, let me think back. Oh, um, they've gone up against threats that seemingly would require Doctor Strange's attention. Now, the question would be okay, if they exist in the same universe, why in the world was the Ancient One not dealing with those threats? The answer could be that she didn't do anything because the Ghostbusters were shown being capable of handling it. And while she couldn't reveal herself to them due to the rules that are supposed to keep her order safe, uh, you know, she was watching them. And so I guess Wong at some point would be privy to this information and would say to Strange, I should tell you something. The Ancient One was well aware of the Ghostbusters and what they do, and because they were shown to be capable of dealing with major threats of a supernatural nature, she never uh, believed it necessary to get involved. And I think that makes sense. Obviously, Doctor Strange would not have been Sorcerer Supreme or Sorcerer at all back in the 80s. And I'm, of course, going by the MCU timeline, not, Marvel as a whole, because that would just overcomplicate things. Um, so, you know, but I think Doctor Strange would still question, okay, why didn't she consider the possibility that, um, because they haven't seen the truths that we have, um, that they're being in possession of that containment unit could be disastrous. And at this point, I think Wong might snicker or something and say, "It's funny you mentioned that because some idiot from the the EPA, yeah, uh, had gotten a court order to basically shut it off, which released every ghost they had captured." Um, to which would pretty much shoot down, Strange's entire argument. That proves that, the Ghostbusters, you would have to physically, like, remove them or detain them or something to be able to get access to that unit. Um, but I think Doctor Strange, being well aware of the fact that when it comes to the magic he has at his disposal through the various artifacts he wields, he's he's basically more comparable to a god than the Ghostbusters, and you know, who's to say that their proton packs could handle an entity as powerful as Dormammu? If an entity like Dormammu found another way to try and do what he was planning in the first Doctor Strange film, or if another individual with powers on the same level as Scarlet Witch came around, how like what could they conceivably try against a reality warper that even Doctor Strange couldn't really do anything about? Um, so I think he would see them sort of as like bumbling blockheads. Like, yes, you might be very well established, you're very intelligent, you've built this equipment, but you're no Tony Stark. You have basically built weaponry to function as equipment used by exterminators that only go after ghosts. Your ghost pest control. But the reality is that these proton packs, they are weapons. They can harm. Um, Me? Oh no, not by any means. And this stream is not supposed to be a conversation about ghost expertise. It's just what I consider to be a fun little scenario. Um, you know, he might even point out like Tony Stark may have built an incredibly dangerous suit of armor that contained, weaponry that was very powerful and destructive, and only got more so with each iteration. But he learned how to control those suits. He also had the know-how, the engineering expertise. He had also been building weapons for many years, so like he had a better understanding of what he was dealing with. Okay then. That doesn't sound like a good idea, but no, it might be fun to somehow bring Tony Stark into the scene, if you will. I'm not sure how, considering the fact that he is a scientist, and while he doesn't deal with the supernatural, um, you know, he'd probably know more about nuclear physics than the Ghostbusters, even though they did design these proton packs. He might be able to find a way to make them safer, maybe even train them how to restrict the flow of the power source so that when they do use them, there's less of a risk that it can cause collateral damage. Maybe he can even train them to be more accurate. Maybe he could even, if they agree to use some of his connections, we're talking a billionaire, not just a incredibly intelligent engineer who built weapons for the military, but a man who has so much money that he could fund um, research and development for better technology, more advanced technology for the Ghostbusters to use. Um, and I kind of feel like Doctor Strange would want to make that happen because New York was put under his jurisdiction when it comes to taking care of supernatural threats. Just because the law is more behind the Ghostbusters doesn't really matter because Doctor Strange operates by different laws essentially. Um, I can't really think of a direct comparison. The only comparison I could think of would be the Green Lanterns, right? Um, but even that's a bad comparison to try and make because the Green Lanterns are quite literally a uh, intergalactic police force. They actually, if I'm not mistaken, have actual authority to arrest, detain, and if worst comes to worst, battle it out to the end with threats that seek to harm entire planets. Doctor Strange, he's not law enforcement. He's more of a champion. Um, so I don't know why I keep blanking. I apologize for this. It happens to me every time. I really should just write all this down before I do a stream. Let me just try and backtrack a bit. Oh, okay. So yeah. So he doesn't have any like legal leg to stand on. However, if he can somehow get Tony Stark involved, Stark might because of his connections due to being an Avenger and due to having certain politicians side with him on certain matters. I mean, we know that he was one of the main people behind making the Accords uh, come to fruition. So maybe he tries to argue once he meets the Ghostbusters, you technically fit the laws um, that are part of the Accords. Um, and that's how that could go. Now, I guess it would be a bit silly for Tony Stark not to know about the Ghostbusters unless it was revealed that because they're so much older, they've mostly retired. Um, I know that I should touch upon the more recent films, but I'm not going to, mostly because I haven't seen them. And the second reason is a bit of bias, which might make people angry with me, but the truth is, I never liked the direction they took those more recent Ghostbusters films. I'm not a fan of them going the kid route. Yes, the Ghostbusters films, the first two, they were silly. There was a lot of stupid funny moments. But what did make it somewhat able to be taken seriously was the fact that the characters Bill Murray, Dan Aykroyd, and Harold Ramis were playing, less so with Bill Murray's character than the other two, but they were playing legitimate scientists who were studying the paranormal, who knew how to build the equipment to track and capture ghosts. Um, they had experience, they had done their research. Going with kids just doesn't sit right with me, regardless of who their family is. Now, I again, as someone who never watched any of the movies, for all I know, it's possible that the characters in the new movies are college graduates who all made it through some made it who all acquired some kind of um, degree in ghost investigations or something similar to that. If that's the case, then okay, yeah, it does make sense, and it pretty much makes what I just said null and void. Um, but from what I remember reading on it, I don't think that's the case. I think it was basically just here's two main characters that just so happen to be the grandchildren of Egon Spengler, and that's why they become Ghostbusters. And that just didn't sit with me. It didn't sit right. And it's why I avoided those movies. Because I would have just gone with a cast of a newer generation of comedians who at that point were relatively the same age as the original actors from the first two movies, in their, at least in their 30s. um Actually, I think they probably were in their 30s, maybe mid 30s at most. Is who I would have went with. So, like, I think Paul Rudd was a great choice to be a Ghostbuster. Um, I think, um, you could have found uh, a woman, an actress or two, who's really good at comedy and can also play the scientist role convincingly. Maybe you could have gone with the actress who played Sheldon's girlfriend in Big Bang Theory, who, as we know, is a real scientist. She's a neuroscientist of some sort. Um, she could have worked very well. I'm blanking on other names, but that's just to give you an idea. Now, I want to backtrack and get back to um, Finn Wolfhard and the other members of the cast. I'm well aware of the fact that at the point that movie came out, they were in their late teens, possibly even early 20s. So they could have easily made it where the plot was that, yes, Spengler was their grandfather and they are interested in learning about the paranormal and ghosts. And so, because of the popularity that the Ghostbusters garnered, they chose to enroll in a newly established um, probably not an entire school, but like a unit or something in a school that teaches advanced sciences, like a paranormal division or something. So they could go there and they could study, and while they're students, they end up having to deal with ghosts. I think that would have worked perfectly. Um, that's more or less exactly what happens in Extreme Ghostbusters. They're all college students who um, take a course that's being taught by Egon, and he serves as their mentor. We don't actually we only see one episode when they're in class, which is the first episode. The rest of them are just them in the firehouse and then receiving a call to deal with some ghosts or other entities. But they're like in their late teens, early 20s. Um, but I mean that's all. Uh, what it is. That is what it is. Too many newcomers. I apologize. I tend to ramble. That's just how my thoughts are. I'm not very good at speeches, so you know, do with that what you will. So anyway, yeah, getting back to Tony Stark and the whole deal with them, and let's just say for to not overcomplicate things, we will add in the new characters from the most recent Ghostbusters films, Afterlife and whatever the second one was. It wasn't Frozen Empire, was it? Um, so if the events of this storyline took place after that film, those actors are definitely going to be in their 20s. Uh, they'd be well established. They'd probably be graduates from college of some sort. Might be working on getting PhDs, right? Would make sense that if they're gonna be Ghostbusters and be taken seriously as Ghostbusters, that they become full-fledged scientists, so they can um, you know enough to upgrade that gear that is probably incredibly outdated And I mean, as with every piece of technology, you want to improve it, right? Um, so I think, that's where Tony Stark would get involved. Um, he'd probably say something like, "Okay, so you all were doing this for a number of years. One of you passed away, unfortunately. Two of the new Ghostbusters are his grandchildren. Um, the original members are still around in some capacity, but they're more like mentors. Um, and this next generation of Ghostbusters are, learning how to face ghosts. But you're all using incredibly dated equipment. Um, and I think it's desperately in need of an upgrade. Number one, you want proton. I think, are they called proton guns? I feel like they never give an actual name to the part of the pack that actually projects the beam. Yeah, I've seen it here before. Um, but in the one animated series, they call them proton guns. So just to make it simpler, I'll for now I'll call them proton guns. Tony works his magic, probably uh, does some testing, runs some tests. Um, wonders if it's possible to build new proton guns that are actually more akin to actual guns, like they're much smaller, but they maybe use repulsor technology, as well as arc reactor technology in some form, so that they don't have to be strapped to a big pack on their backs. Or maybe they channel energy through some kind of a suit that's not exactly an Iron Man suit, but it's a bit protective. Um, I know that originally Dan Aykroyd wanted the Ghostbusters to look a little more militaristic with helmets and like I think maybe even body armor, kind of looking more akin to SWAT members. Which, I mean, it makes sense because the job would obviously be very dangerous. Um, so if you're working with Stark, he's gonna want to outfit you with top quality equipment. Um, he would probably also require that they learn some degree of combat competency. Um, they're not being trained to fight enemies that the Avengers are there to face off against, but even ghosts that you're just there to trap. You do want to work on your aim. You do kind of have to fight them to some extent. It is a fight of sorts. It's just it's not a fight that can ever become lethal because they're ghosts. Welcome back, Land King 88. So basically, I think at this point, Doctor Strange more or less just goes away, just says, "Hey, looks like you've got this under control. My work is done. I've introduced you. Uh, I don't really have any input here. Uh, you know, I have no authority over any of them. If somebody did, it would be you and the likes of Ross, um, and possibly even well, I think Shield was no longer a thing at that point, but other members of government. Um, Trying to remember the name of Martin Freeman's character, but he comes to mind uh, as a person that would have something to say on this. Um, so yeah, and I want to make it clear that I'm by no means suggesting that Ghostbusters become like a branch of the Avengers. No, no way, no how. Uh, they're strictly a pest control company that captures ghosts. If there's anything beyond their ability to deal with, that's when the likes of Doctor Strange and the Avengers step in. Though I do feel like Strange would probably put in place a series of spells so as to keep ghosts from potentially gaining entrance to the firehouse the Ghostbusters um, use as a base. Maybe even put together some charms for them to use. What do you mean by why did I change my contents? I have. Not often, but certain films I have done that for. I don't go out of my way to watch foreign films, but there had been certain foreign films that I was interested in enough to want to watch. I'm sorry. What does that question mean? Gonna have to be a bit more specific for me to understand what you mean by that. What do you mean? Why am I a native English speaker? Because I was born in the United States and I'm a white man who never learned another language. If I didn't use subtitles, I would have no idea what's being said. Make it possible to what? Oh, yeah. Okay, yeah. I get you. Do some workout. What do you mean? What do you mean by that? Okay. Whew. Alright, everyone. Not sure if it's the humidity or what, but something is making me feel really exhausted. So, because of that, I think it's probably a good time to call this stream ended. I want to thank you all once again for joining. If you have yet to do so and would like to, please consider leaving a like, subscribing, also leave a comment if you wish. That goes for either while I'm still alive or when the stream is public. This is Black Angel Inserts. Real name Lonnie. And the truth is, I am Iron Man.